pomaže Bog i dobrodošli na čas crkvene škole za ovu nedjelju. Welcome to church school for this Sunday. Let's pray to the Lord. U ime Otca i Sina i Svetog Duha, Oče naš koji si na nebesima, da se sveti ime Tvoje, da dođe carstvo Tvoje, da bude volja Tvoja na zemlji kao što je nebo. Hljeb naš nasušni daj nam danas, i prosti nam dugove naše, kao što mi oproštamo dužnicima svojim, i navedi nas u iskušenje, no izbavi nas od lukavoga. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Slava Otcu i Sinu i Svetom Duhu, i sad i u veki u vekova vekova. Gospode Isuse Hriste Bože naš, blagoslovi ove učitelje, ovo učenje i ovi učenike koji će primati ovo dobro učenje na Tvoje proslavljenje, njihovo spasenje i za sve što postoji na njeno izbavljenje. Lord Jesus Christ our God, bless these teachers, this teaching, and these students to whom this good teaching will be imparted for your glorification, for their sanctification and deliverance of all of creation. Amen.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the continuing series of the Lives of the Serbian Saints. We have gone through many of the Serbian saints who lived and labored in America of modern day times, contemporary times. And I know when you think of saints, you look at the icons around, you think of saints of some people who, holy men and women who lived in many decades, many centuries past. And that sainthood is something that is reserved only for those of early Christianity. And as we've progressed through the lives of these Serbian saints, we see that this is not so. We have Serbian saints who reposed on this land as late as 1962. We did the correlation between what was happening in the time of their lives and what was happening in modern America. We have showing the life of Saint Jackson, Saint Sebastian Jackson, born in 1863 in California, is the first American-born Serbian priest who has now become a saint and has founded the first Serbian church on American ground in Jackson, California. That church is still a surviving, thriving church today. Saint Medania blessed the grounds of many of the Serbian churches that we now have standing, including my own home parish in Youngstown, Ohio, and Father's home parish in Hamilton, Ontario. So we see these saints were active and living amongst us, on walking on the grounds that we currently can walk on if we go to Jackson, California, or like I grew up in a church that was blessed by Saint Medania. So today we're going to look at the life of another Serbian saint, another modern-day Serbian saint, born December 23rd, 1880, in the village of Lelic, near Valjevo, was one of 9 children. And you look at the times, that is a very large family, and of course not wealthy. His family would not have been a wealthy family. So we have, born about the same time. St. Magdalena was 1889, St. John Maximus was 1896, St. Sebastian was 1863. So you have all these men born in the late 1800s, and all these men, while we're studying them, played a very integral part in establishing the Serbian Orthodox Church. And Christian witnessing, as we're all called to be Christian witnesses by our lifestyle and how we live and how we portray ourselves every day. We can't be Christians at one time in our life and then act differently in another time in our life. We need to be Christians all the time and living in the ways and the teachings of Christ. And we will see that, as we talked about for the other saints, they all had hardships, they all had trials, they all had tribulations, they all had adversaries, but they all worked through it with love and kindness and gentleness. So he was one of 9 children. He was baptized very soon after his birth because he was a very frail child. He was not healthy even at birth. So right then, that could be a stumbling block or a handicap for many people. but not for Saint Nikolai. He was able to work through every single adversary, anything that came, affliction, anything that came upon him, and work through it and maintain his faith and love for God. All of his other siblings perished in the war, the Serbian War of 1912, 1913. Every other sibling, he had no surviving siblings. So think of that as being right then, he could have turned against God. He could have said at that point, why? Do you sometimes want to question, why did this happen to me? But he didn't. He maintained faith, he maintained piety, he maintained his love for his church. He, like Saint Sebastian before him, and maybe at the same time of him, he remembers in Serbia his mother walking him to the monastery of Chilia, which is a standing monastery today, and attending services there at Chilia Monastery. His mother was a strong example, as Saint Sebastian's mother was for him in his faith. And we need to realize that we all need to be examples of our faith. We need to demonstrate to others around us who may not be Orthodox, may not be even Christian, what Christian love is. And that means loving everybody unconditionally, working through any afflictions, temptations, trials, and not slandering or blaspheming God. He was very brilliant as a child, very brilliant beyond his years in his studies. He attended the school Chilia Monastery and got a secondary education valuable. His desire was in the military, to serve in the Serbian military, but he couldn't because of his small stature. He was a very tiny guy, very small. And that was a handicap to an extent, but he didn't let that stop him or slow him down. God had another plan for Nikola, though. He wanted him to be a warrior for the kingdom of heaven, a true Christian witness. He then submitted his papers in a theological seminary in Belgrade, of which he had an extreme talent of writing and speaking. And he graduated from the seminary and ended up being a professor at the theological seminary in Belgrade. He wrote many works of poetry, books. He has Prayers by the Lake, Prologue from Euclid. There are many spiritual writings, many books of his sermons, which are very enlightening just to read and to get the insight about how his love for God and could translate to us, and how he brought many people to the faith and united many people in times of adversity, just by being an example and being a holy, and the essence of his holiness was evident around him. As he was teaching in Belgrade, he was already very weak in nature. He found himself very seriously with a disease called scrofula. But he did not let this deter him in his service for the church. He worked closely with all the village priests, aiding the poor, tending to the needy, tending to the sick. He made himself familiar with all peoples and their life. His speeches can be found in many sermons in many journals. He went on for his doctorate at Bern University in England, also in Switzerland, and finally in Russia. He received his doctorate in Bern at the age of 28. Notice how these adversities did not prevent him pursuing anything. Nothing was, and that is like in today's gospel, that all things are possible if we believe in God, if we have the trust in Christ. The disciples were able to feed 5,000 people in today's gospel with 5 loaves of bread. It is believing in the power that was given us through our baptism and chrismation, that the power of God living in us can make us be successful and overcome adversity. Upon his return to Europe, he became ill again, this time with a disease called dysentery, which kept him hospitalized for 6 weeks. But he never lost his faith in God. He vowed that if he recovered, he would devote his entire life to monasticism. Up until this point, he was not. He was very involved in church, like the running of the church, the operations. He was a great orator, making great speeches. He was giving talks at various universities. He decided that he was going to give up all the earthly and devote his life to monasticism and solely to God. As you remember, also Saint Medardea was also frail, but he was also a very determined man. Comparing the paths of these saints who lived at about the same time, we see their only devotion was to serve God and the people. He was ordained a higher monk in 1809 in Ravelica, taking the name Nikolai. He had to complete his secondary education papers before he would be able to teach again at the theological seminary, which he did. And which St. John Maximovich and St. Magdalia also taught at the theological seminary. He became famous for his beautiful sermons, writing many beautiful books, and his popularity on current day topics that afflicted people at that time brought him both fame and criticism from his enemies. So he was not without ridicule. He was not without criticism for what he was doing, but he didn't let it stop him. He persevered. He persevered with love, not with aggression, not with hatred, not with bitterness, not with retaliation, but with love. On several occasions, the Austrians attempted to silence him in his works. He participated in the wars of the Serbian Wars between 1912 and 1918, about the same times as St. Sebastian, St. Magdalia. He counseled the war-torn. He helped the needy. He helped the poor. He gave up his salary to come to people's aid. Envy persisted against Nikolai, but he forgave readily and easily. In 1919, he was sent on a Serbian mission to America to assist St. Magdalia in unifying the Serbian church that was in its new stages in America, and to help the unification of the Serbian communities here. He worked also closely with the Episcopalians and Anglican churches, trying to bring some of those people back into Orthodoxy. He was ordained a bishop in Monastery Žiča in March of 1919. He was transferred to the monastery of Ohrid, the diocese of Ohrid, in 1920. During these times, he traveled extensively on many missionary missions to spread the faith, to unite the growing Orthodox communities and Serbian communities abroad, and to attend many church conferences. It was at this time his famous prologue of Ohrid books were written, and he based these on the lives of the saints and the writings of the Holy Fathers. Great readings and easy to read for any age group. In 1934, he was reappointed to Žiča as bishop. During this period of time, he found himself growing closer and closer to God. He alienated himself from everything Western in society and imbued himself in orthodoxy and the teachings of Sveti Sava to the Serbian people. His literary works at this time reached their full potential. His missionary works focused on unification of the Serbian churches in the newly established states. Here in America, he came many times to America to work at the conference in Cleveland when they wanted to, in 1935, when they wanted to appoint St. Magdalia as bishop. He and St. Magdalia didn't want it. He agreed to be the under bishop to help St. Magdalia, and at that point, St. Magdalia became the first Serbian bishop in the newly formed Diocese of Canada and America, with the help of St. Nikola. A spiritual growth had taken place inside him. Just as we physically grow, he has a spiritual maturity. As you notice, as you're growing older, you become more mature in your behavior, in your actions. You also grow maturely spiritually, and that is what he found at this time in his life, that he was becoming more in touch with God, closer to God. His piety alone attracted flocks of faithful to him. Draw closer to God, and he will draw closer to you. But by being an example of piety, he drew flocks of people to him. But besides the faithful who came to him, he was not without enemies, slanderers, schemers, who plotted against him. But he endured once again and overcame all by his transparent life and continuing his good works for God and mankind. He became the Serbian John Chrysostom. Like Sveti Sava long ago, he became the spiritual light of the Serbian people for that generation and all that followed. In the time of World War II was coming upon us, he built many orphanages and helped many children even prior to the war, bringing them out of homelessness and into the orphanages to find them homes. He lived a virtuous life. Worldly glory was meaningless to him. Worldly wisdom meant spiritual poverty. Humility ruled his life. Christ's words, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," were his foundation and everything to him. And he imparted this to everyone who drew near and he encountered. Draw closer to God, and thousands will draw closer to you. He turned from the world. He turned to his inner self and toward his people who had a thirst for God. And you have World War II now, where Serbia is being torn apart again. After World War One, they now are being torn apart again by communism, separating families, being taken, put into prison camps, and this was the time that my dear grandparents probably lived through. My father, people in their 90s, lived through World War II and lived through the Ustashi, the communists coming through. Well, Saint Nikola was no exception to that. He also had to endure the affliction that was being inflicted upon the Serbian people. He was arrested by the Germans July 12th on the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul, 1941, and confined to the Ljubostina monastery, and later to the Vojkovica near Pančevo, where both he and the Patriarch of Serbia were placed under strict house arrest and held there by heavily guarded armed German soldiers. He spent his days in prayer, never giving up. On September 14, 1944, he was moved to the infamous death camp of Dachau. Does anybody remember reading about Dachau in school? A little? That was a very horrible place where millions of people were killed by the communists. Saint Nikolai was thrown in Dachau with the Patriarch of Serbia at the time, and they were held there, not knowing if they were going to live, not knowing if they were going to even make it through. But they never gave up. They never gave up on the Serbian people. They never gave up on their church. They never gave up their faith. So when we think of things that pull us away from God, separate us from that close unity with God, maybe it's just a feeling of anger towards someone else, or maybe it's a feeling of I'm bored in church, or maybe it's a feeling of what does the church have to give to me? I could pray anywhere. When you get these feelings, think of these saints who endured so much affliction, being Saint Nikolai, being in the Dachau concentration camp, praying ceaselessly for the people of Serbia and for his and the Patriarch's safe release. It was on May 8th, 1945, that he was set free with the Patriarch by the American Army Division of Allied Forces. For the first few months, they drifted together throughout Western Europe, both of them homeless at this point. The Patriarch can't go back to Serbia because of communism. He had no place actually ever to go. But they kept working for the church. They kept working to keep the people faithful. Eventually, the Patriarch of Vila was sent to return to Serbia to be at the helm of the Serbian church. However, Nikolai began a thorny course of immigration. He always carried with him his love for his homeland and for his people. He came to America in 1946, which would be his final resting place, where he actually reposed. He was frail for being in the concentration camps. He was already not in good health, in much pain, and seriously ill. Nevertheless, this did not deter his continuing missionary work in America, encouraging the faint-hearted, making peace amongst those who quarreled amongst the Serbian churches in America, and teaching the faith to those who yearned to be closer to God. During this time, he continued to write many publications in both English and Serbian. He did fundraisers in America to send money back to the monasteries in Serbia. He continued to be active in all church matters. He taught at St. Sava's seminary in Libertyville that was founded by St. Mudadier. He taught at St. Vladimir's. He taught at St. Tikhon's, the camp that we didn't have camp this year, but the holy grounds of St. Tikhon's where St. Nikolai actually walked. We have access to it. We could see the room where he reposed. It was at St. Tikhon's on March 18, 1956, that he reposed, preparing for Divine Liturgy. And right now it's a chapel. If you go into St. Tikhon's Monastery, they will take you to the St. Nikolai room, and you can physically see where was his office when he was at St. Tikhon's, and you could actually see the room was now a chapel where he reposed. His body was later transferred to St. Salva's in Libertyville, and later he was taken to back to his homeland of Chile, which was his wish, to where his remains now are. So we have a saint, modern day saint, Christian witnessed in Serbia, Christian witnessed here, brought unity to the Serbs here in America, wrote many of the songs that we sing during divine liturgy. This little book is all St. Nikolai songs. And those of you who have participated in the Christmas program or Sveti Sava, do you remember singing Sveti Sava Srbe Vole? That was written by St. Nikolai. The song we sing now, we can start singing now during the mission fast, Mario Slavia, was written by St. Nikolai. Bruje Tije Zvučna Zvona was written by St. Nikolai. The song that was sung today during Divine Liturgy is Našli Kote. That was written by St. Nikolai. So you see the impact that one person could have on many future generations just by their Christian witness. Though we never met personally or shook hands with or took a blessing from St. Nikolai, we are blessed every single day with his music, with his works. Most of our songs that we use are in this book that we sing. And that's what I'm going to try doing. I'm hoping to do a summer camp at the end of Dormition, the 27th, 28th, 29th. And we'll finish our banner of the lives of the Serbian saints who labored in America, and just Serbian saints in general. And we will practice singing some of this music so you become very familiar with it, and get our junior choir back up and running. They're beautiful songs, and they were all written by a very pious man who devoted his life to the church. So I have a picture here for those of you who are in attendance. Can you kind of take a look and see what's going on? What does the priest have in the bishop have in his hand? Has the blessing to the conjula and the basilica. The basil to bless. This is a picture. Yeah, this is a picture of, I'll hold it up to the camera so those who are watching virtually could see it. This is a picture of whoever was the current priest in Philadelphia in 1952, St. Nikolai, and faithful, blessing the cornerstone of our old church down on Hancock Street. So this community has the blessing of St. Nikolai forever with us. So think of how fortunate we are to be in a church building, and in a church, well, not this building here, but in a church. The cornerstone still sits right out here on the side of the church. To be in a community that was founded and established with the love that St. Nikolai had for the Serbian people. So that is, I implore all of us to continue in our Christian witness. Christian witnessing is not something that is for select people. It is for everybody. And we have been endowed with this love that St. Nikolai has brought to the Serbian people, not only in Serbia, not only in Monastery Žiča, not only back in 1952 to the Serbian community that he blessed here, but to all of us. When we continue to listen to the songs, to pray, to read the lives of the saints, and most of all, to live our lives piously and faithfully, always Christian witnessing, and being cautious of our behavior, being very ardent in our faith, not letting ourselves succumb to temptation. And when we do, know that the church is here for us to bring us back up, to lift us up, and that we always have the love of God to help us no matter what adversity is thrown before us. If St. Nikolai could endure dacha, we could certainly endure someone saying a nasty word to us, by turning the other cheek, by being God-loving, by showing love toward everybody, by controlling the passions, and developing the virtues. That is being a true Christian witness. And we were all endowed with this when we became the royal priesthood of God through our baptism, through our chrismation in the Holy Church. We are all called to be in God's ministry. We're all called to help others as Saint Nikolai helped others, even when he had nothing of his own. We are all called to discover the riches of the church in our worship tradition, to own our church, to be proud of being part of the Orthodox Christian community, to show gratitude continually to God, thanking God for all the blessings that we have, for our health, for our families, and to use our own royal priesthood as a service to God. We are all called, not just the ordained clergy, but we are all called to be that Christian witness, to be a people with a purpose, as this little article here is. So that is the life of Saint Nikolai of Gicha. There are relics of Saint Nikolai actually in St. Tikhon's in the reliquary, which you can venerate when you go up there. We will make our board. If we have any volunteers who wish to take a particular saint and work on that, the bullet points for that, I'd like to have everything up so we have that up for the people to tour when we have our festival September 18th and 19th. If anybody would like any materials, anything, supplies, I could get that to you, poster board, anything that you would need. So that is for the continuing series of the lives of the saints who walked in America. We will have a couple more saints who are Serbian background, who are from America, who walked in America as well, that we will do the next couple of weeks. And then we'll take a look at some of the other saints from Serbia who were, maybe St. Basil, also some of the other very strong saints who are very well known throughout all lands. So thank you all for your participation. If anybody has any questions, feel free to email us, and we will, God willing, see everybody next week. We thank thee, O Creator, that thou hast vouchsafed us by thy grace to give heed to thy learning. Bless our masters, parents, and teachers who bring us to knowledge of the truth, and grant us the strength and firmness to persevere in our studies. Amen. Zavaljamo ti, soretius, što si nas udostojio svoje milosti, te smo pažljivo slušali nauku koju nam se predaje, spasi i pomiluje strašenije naše roditelje i učitelje, koji nas vode da poznamo istinu, a nama daruje snagu i moć, i možemo produžiti korisno učenje. Amen.